Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tackling something that I know keeps so many parents and community members wide awake at night. We're going to dive deep into a really profound struggle. How do we actually pass on genuine, unshakable faith to the next generation? Because let's be honest, we look around at the world today, we see the challenges, and it's easy to feel this massive sense of urgency. We worry about our kids, our families, and how to preserve our core values in what feels like an incredibly complex world. But what if the strategies we've been leaning on are completely backwards? Well, let's jump right in and explore a totally paradigm-shifting perspective on where true faith actually comes from.
So, can a safe environment actually save your faith? It's a completely natural human instinct. When we feel threatened by a highly secular or anti-Islamic environment, our immediate reaction is to just pack up our bags and go find a bubble. We think to ourselves, okay, if I can just get my kids out of here, if I can just move them to a place where everyone looks like us and believes like us, then for sure their faith will be safe. It's a really deep anxiety we carry as parents. But as we unpack our source material today, you're going to see that this question fundamentally misunderstands how faith is actually built.
Which brings us to Section 1, the illusion of safe environments. See, there's this idealized dream that drives families to uproot their entire lives. They move so they can hear the azan echoing in the streets, so they can literally just walk down the block to buy halal chicken and to be surrounded by a Muslim majority. But the hidden reality on the ground, it's often radically different. Once you actually arrive in these so-called safe havens, you're frequently hit in the face with systemic bribery, widespread corruption, and really deep-seated classism. If you don't speak the local language, you might just find out that the language of bribery works perfectly well. So this environment that looks flawlessly Islamic on the outside, it can be deeply, deeply compromised on the inside. The source shares a super telling anecdote about this. Picture a nice, upscale restaurant in Lahore. Suddenly, a truck driver, someone clearly from a different social class, walks in and sits down to eat. And what happens? People get incredibly uncomfortable. They start whispering, wait, how did these people get in here? They're totally ruining the vibe. And remember, this isn't happening in America. This is happening in a Muslim-majority environment. Islam came to completely destroy judgments based on race, language, and class, teaching that absolutely all humans stand equal in prayer. And yet, we've somehow managed to restore these prejudices. It just goes to show that social and moral corruption exists everywhere. Just changing your zip code? Yeah, that doesn't magically guarantee a righteous environment.
And that harsh reality leads us to this utterly heartbreaking quote. Honestly, this summarizes a tragedy that plays out 1,000 times over. A parent goes to the local imam, pulls him aside into a corner and says, "My daughter, she says she doesn't want to wear hijab. She doesn't want to pray." And the really profound sadness here is that these are very often the parents who spent extra money, sacrificed their own careers, and uprooted their entire families specifically to move to a place with a mosque right nearby and an Islamic environment. They literally thought they were buying safety for their kids' faith, but the environment, it just didn't save them.
Moving on to Section 2, Outward Rituals versus Inner Faith.
Think about it. How often do we judge the success of our parenting by this strict external checklist? Like, okay, the child finished their hefs and memorized the Quran. Check. The child shows up to pray. Check. The young man grew a small beard. Check. We check off these boxes and we just breathe a massive sigh of relief thinking, okay, phew, my kid is saved. But here's the absolute crucial point. These are just external expectations. They are outward signs. If the inner thought process hasn't actually been transformed, if their mindset hasn't been truly engaged, then relying on this checklist is incredibly dangerous. It just gives us this false sense of security while the child's internal foundation is actually super fragile. If we only rely on those outward signs, we fall straight into what the source defines as the Bani Israel mentality. Historically, there were nations who would boast about their massive numbers. They'd look around, see a vast majority of people who looked like them, practiced like them, and they felt incredibly proud and secure. On the outside, they totally looked apart, but on the inside, they had become completely hollow. And we risk becoming exactly the same today if we think that just because there are nearly 2 billion Muslims in the world, or because we moved into a Muslim neighborhood, our faith is somehow automatically secure. Large numbers and outward displays, they absolutely cannot protect the hollow interior.
So, where do we turn? That brings us to Section 3, the mindset of Ibrahim.
Faith is not made by the environment. Let's think about Prophet Ibrahim for a second. He didn't live in an Islamic center. He didn't have halal restaurants around the corner or an imam to counsel him. He was literally in the middle of a desert, completely surrounded by a society steeped in idolatry. There were zero safe places to hide. Yet his faith was absolutely unbreakable. Why? Because true faith doesn't seep in from the outside environment. It is ignited from the inside out.
Consider the reality of his life. He was always followed by a minority. Actually, for much of his life, he was actively opposed by his own father and his entire society. Everyone was angry with him. He stood entirely alone in the darkness. We often complain that we feel like a minority in America or Australia or Europe, but the truth is, true believers are a minority everywhere, even in Muslim-majority countries where the broader culture might mock true faith or just normalize corruption. The mindset of Ibrahim means standing firm, totally alone if you have to, with your loyalty tied only to the Creator, regardless of who is upset with you.
If your internal fire is lit, you will become the light. You won't fear the darkness will fear you. Man, what an incredibly empowering metaphor. When we obsess over finding a safe environment, we are basically acting out of a fear of the dark. We just want to hide in a corner. But if you actually cultivate that internal conviction, if the ground of your heart wakes up and catches fire, you don't need to hide anymore. You bring the light with you wherever you go. The anti-Islamic environment doesn't change you, you change the environment.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, Cultivating Truth Faith at Home. 0. That is exactly how many times you can successfully outsource your child's faith. Let me say that again. 0. You cannot outsource this to a Sunday school. You cannot outsource this to a famous guest speaker. You can't hand it off to a local imam, and you certainly cannot outsource it by simply moving to a different physical environment. If the transformation doesn't happen inside your own home, led directly by you, no external resource is going to magically save your family's faith.
Because look, the reality of the modern temptations our kids are facing today, it's staggering. Sure, they are heading into college environments full of wrong paths, but honestly, they don't even need to leave the house anymore. With smartphones, a child can literally hide an entire double life in their pocket. They can use secret apps, they can create fake email addresses. You might look at them sitting quietly on the couch and think, oh, they are perfectly safe, having absolutely no idea what they are actually engaging with on that screen. External policing is just impossible today. You can't monitor them 24/7. The only thing that will protect them when they are all alone with their screens is their own internal moral compass. So the crucial takeaway here is that we must actively build that internal faith ourselves. Step 1, as we just talked about, is to stop outsourcing. You have to take responsibility. Step 2 is incredibly vital. You must welcome the hardest, most difficult questions. Young people have deep, complex philosophical questions. Who is my Lord? Why should I worship him? If you shut those questions down just because they make you uncomfortable, you're going to lose them. You absolutely have to engage with their minds. And step 3, you have to become a student of the Quran yourself. You really cannot expect your children to value something that you yourself don't engage with meaningfully. Let me put it this way. Children are like incredible little mirrors. If you are deeply passionate about cars, your son will probably develop a huge interest in cars. If you are obsessed with fashion, your daughter will likely care a lot about fashion. They absorb what you love. So, if you want your children to have the mindset of Ibrahim, if you want them to be deeply rooted in faith, they need to see you genuinely passionate about pondering the Quran. They need to hear you discussing it at the dinner table. When they see your mind totally engaged with the text, their minds will naturally open up to it as well.
Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope you keep reflecting on this, keep questioning. Because at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, are you just changing your environment to hide in a corner? Or are you actively doing the hard work to build the unbreakable mindset of Ibrahim within your family?